Hi everyone, welcome to episode 1 of Sicksplaining, a new podcast that I have been working on for the last couple of months. My intention with this podcast is to help share stories and share information. It is not meant to be a replacement for medical advice, so you'll see a disclaimer at the beginning of each episode to consult your healthcare practitioners, and I encourage you to do that. But there are some really great insights and lessons, I think, that can be learned when we listen to other people's stories. And so my hope is to give you the opportunity to do that and to share a little of my own story as well. For those who don't know me, my name is Sabrina, and I've been living with CFS now for about 6 years. I'm not one of those individuals who has the date when she got sick. I just seemed to be sick for a long time and then I never really recovered. I've also been diagnosed, just so we're clear on, and for the record, I've also been diagnosed with fibromyalgia, multiple chemical sensitivities, mast cell activation syndrome, and postural orthostatic intolerance syndrome. So it's one of those things with chronic illnesses. I'm not unique in that. Once we have one diagnosis, we tend to gather a couple more. They tend to go hand in hand with each other. I sometimes joke when I'm feeling like I can laugh about it, that they're like trading cards and I feel like I'm collecting them. The reality is that all these chronic illnesses bump into each other in terms of treatment options and trying to manage symptoms. So it's a bit tricky. For me personally, I'm a little bit more focused, I think, on CFS just because it's so all-encompassing in my life. But it was really important to me to put together this podcast. I felt very strongly that I wanted to take something negative and turn it around and do something positive with it. And so I really hope that some of you will watch, and I really hope that some of you will find it helpful. This will be our first series of episodes, and I'm a newbie to podcasting, so bear with me while I learn this new skill and figure this out. And if you have any suggestions or ideas, you can always follow me on Twitter, Instagram, or reach out on Facebook and share those ideas, whether they're future episode ideas or future guests, great books you're reading, documentaries you've watched, but feel free to continue the conversation. All right, so episode 1, I have some pretty wonderful guests. 2 new friends of mine who I met in May of 2018 and have since grown to admire and respect a great deal as advocates and individuals who are living with CFS, as am I. And so we thought we'd have a conversation about that to sort of, I guess, kick off this podcast and get us started. So Scott has had HIV since 1998. He was the first person with HIV to compete at the Triathlon World Championships. He's had ME since 2012, and he's going to share a little bit about his experience living with these conditions. And my second guest for this episode is Ali. Ali's a law student at Osgoode Hall Law School in Toronto. She's 22 and has been sick with ME since September of 2013. So please join me in welcoming my guest.
Hi, welcome. Thanks for coming and joining me on the first podcast.
Thanks for having me.
We're going to start off by talking about diagnosis, because that's always, I think, a topic that a lot of people don't really understand. If they're healthy, they don't understand the process that we go through to get diagnosed. And for those folks who are newer to being sick, I think they're going through that process right now. So maybe we can offer them some assistance, some stories, some ideas of what worked for us, or maybe some stories that'll help them feel like they're not so alone. So first off, Scott, how long did it take and what was your process for getting diagnosed?
Well, I got sick on August 9th, 2012. Woke up feeling that day like I never ever felt before. And it took me, I think, less than 6 weeks to figure out what was wrong with me based on the post-exertional malaise symptoms. So it was being a triathlete. I did a lot of swimming, biking, running. And so it was easy to pick up on the pattern of, couple of hours after I exercise, I started to feel really crappy. So it only took me less than 6 weeks. But to get an official diagnosis from a doctor, that took 4 years.
And how many doctors do you think you saw over the course of that time? Because I know for me, I've probably seen about a dozen doctors, most of which probably were fairly unfamiliar with ME, and so didn't really know how to guide me, weren't really entirely certain if it was real or not, and didn't have a whole lot of advice to offer me in their office. What was your experience like?
Yeah, I would say it was like that as well during those early years. I saw a number of doctors for the first year or so. And then, so I was sick for 4 months, and then it took me about 4 months to recover. So when I started to recover, I wasn't really motivated to go see doctors anymore, even though I probably still had appointments and stuff like an MRI. And then I didn't see any doctor, including my HIV doctor, for a year because I'd sort of soured on the whole medical experience by that point because I'd been discriminated against, basically. And so then I got really sick again. And that's when I re-engaged with the healthcare system, but in a different way. Now I had more experience with dealing with the medical system from a chronic illness that is misunderstood, as opposed to my experience with HIV in the system, which I cannot say more good things about. So it's a very contrasting experience. So it took me a while to adjust to the not so good experience with the healthcare system. And so the way I approach the healthcare system now is if it's any new physician or doctor or healthcare worker, and it's not related specifically to ME, but to perhaps a comorbidity, I refrain from mentioning ME because then I'm more likely to get better service, or at least less discrimination.
Interesting. Ali, what's your experience been like in terms of getting diagnosed and seeing different physicians? Have you had a more positive experience than we have?
Yes and no. I think for me, the one key positive is that I have a really great family doctor. And a family doctor who I've been seeing regularly before I got sick. And for me, when I got sick, the change was so evident to everyone in my life that I didn't experience the same disbelief that a lot of people do about whether or not you're sick. There was still a lot of questions of what it was, but I think everyone was coming from the perspective that there was something wrong and we needed to figure out what it was. So I kind of skipped that first step that a lot of people go through of having to actually convince family members, friends, medical professionals that there's something wrong. So it did take me a long time, to figure out what was going on, but I was really lucky to have been kind of believed and supported from the beginning in figuring it out. That wasn't the case for all the different doctors I saw. So my family doctor is really wonderful, but because she's a family doctor, she doesn't have that specialized knowledge with ME CFS that, is kind of necessary. And so for me, although my presentation of ME was very traditional in a lot of senses in that it came right after mono, it also was atraditional in some other senses. For me, one of my cardinal symptoms initially was that I was getting fevers almost every day, particularly with exertion. And so I think that made my family doctor a bit uncomfortable with giving the diagnosis of ME, just because that's not kind of a textbook presentation. And also that can be a sign of underlying autoimmune illnesses, things like that. So she sent me off to different specialists to try to figure out if there was something else going on. So I saw a number of people. One particular bad experience that I had was with a specialist. It was probably about 8 months into me being sick. And I had gone to the appointment, had given kind of a full background of my medical history, and particularly a background of my medical history that included some mental health background. And things like that. And then he did a full physical, and afterwards told me that I was perfectly healthy and should just see a therapist. And so, in his perspective, it was depression that was giving me somatic symptoms. And I had asked, especially with my fevers, being saying, how is being depressed giving me fevers? And was told to just stop taking my temperature, which is really a good way to stop fevers from coming. So I have definitely had negative experiences, but I think the experience of having, I also have, my parents are doctors as well. And so I've had people in the system to be able to help me navigate the system, which is really crucial, I think, because, you know, they know what information I should give, what information I shouldn't necessarily lead with, what, like how to kind of present my situation in a way that's going to make me believed and treated as credible. And that's not something we should have to do as patients, but having my mom in my life to be able to kind of guide me through those procedures, and even just to be present at doctor's appointments, I've taken so much more seriously when my mom, the physician, is in the room and things like that. So I think the combination of that and having a supportive family doctor have helped me to navigate the system a lot more smoothly than some people have had to.
Allie, may I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Going back to that bad experience with the physician, was your mom in the room at that time, and how did you feel when you got that response from that physician?
So she wasn't in the room for that one. She had driven me there, but was in the waiting room. I cried the whole way home. It was a really negative experience, and I can still feel that feeling when I think about that encounter, because the experience of being dismissed so categorically sticks with you. And I think for me, there were a lot of factors contributing to it. There was the fact that I had a mental health history, and so that was kind of almost like used as a way to dismiss the physical symptoms that I was experiencing. There was also the experience of me being a 17-year-old girl, and there's a lot of reasons in that I'm not taken seriously, right? Like, I'm still a teenager, I'm a woman, and there's a lot of things in there that kind of all just wrap up together to make it a really difficult experience. But yeah, I think the feeling of being disbelieved and of not being taken seriously is something that we can all relate to, and that it doesn't go away. Like, that feeling sticks with you.
Yeah, I think, everybody I've talked to has had just such difficult, challenging situations in the doctor's offices. And I hope that we're going to be able to see some change with that over the next couple of years, where we start to educate physicians, especially family doctors, because I think they're seeing folks first, and they can really be the difference between a positive path or a not so positive path. For me, I got sick about 6 or 7 years ago, and I just sort of had a rotation of viruses, or what seemed like a rotation of viruses. I was constantly sick. Strep viruses, pneumonia viruses, just kind of continuously, one after the other. And I never really got well after that. And because I was so driven, and I sort of was into a lot of different things and doing community work and working really long hours, and I have 2 children, there was a lot of initial talk about, maybe you've got too much on your plate, you've taken too much on. This is probably...
I had that same response at first too.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that when we're women and we go in, the first sort of line of thinking is that, we've got too much on our plate, and I had one physician in particular tell me, maybe you're just not cut out to be a mom and have a career. Maybe that's just too much for you. So I spent the first few years really asking myself some tough questions. Am I not cut out for this much stuff that I'm doing? Have I taken too much on? But the reality is I had always taken that kind of stuff on before and hadn't had those issues. So I kept pushing forward and kept asking questions. And I think the more I asked questions, the more I became a challenge. And when I look through my medical notes, I went from being a pleasant female to just being a female in my notes, which was very clear to me. There was a pattern evolving where I was becoming too challenging. And I'm not a terribly challenging personality per se, but definitely in a doctor's office, because I wasn't getting answers and I was continuously going home and feeling a lack of function and really seeing my life slip away, struggling, having to come home from work after a long day and just crashing on the couch and falling asleep immediately, missing out on time with my kids. That was the thing that motivated me to keep pushing for answers. But it took years. And it ended up being a nurse practitioner at our local clinic here who ended up diagnosing me. She's a godsend. I credit her very much with, getting me on the right path, because once I had a diagnosis, because I had never even considered ME/CFS, that had never even made the list. So when we started working together and I had a diagnosis, I finally had somewhere to channel my energy and my research skills. And so I went right to town and started to figure out what's what. I'm not the only patient who's had to go to the US to seek assistance. I have a fantastic ME specialist in San Francisco who has been incredibly helpful in terms of providing me with a treatment plan, and we're treating symptoms. We haven't gotten to root causes, but we don't have the research there yet to really be able to dig into this, as you guys know. So the best we can expect right now from our physicians is a good treatment plan. And anything I had been offered Canada-wise, across Canada, I think most patients are struggling with self-management is the only thing that's given to us in our toolbox. So deep breathing, mindfulness, eating healthy, those are all wonderful things to do. And I don't discredit those. I think they're very important in the grand scheme of things. But the reality is, for me, it wasn't bringing back my function. Maybe it was keeping things from getting progressively worse because I was panicking about losing function. So in terms of that, of course, those things are helpful, but it wasn't giving me my life back. So going down to the US was a very interesting experience because the doctor took me seriously right away. We had a very different type of appointment than I'd ever had. And when I came home, I had medications to try, treatment options, and I had support. It was the first time my husband and I walked out of the appointment and we said it was the first time we felt like we had somebody that we could trust so that we didn't have to be the quote unquote doctors. Because I'm not a doctor, I'm not a healthcare professional. You guys are not healthcare professionals. And I think we often get a lot of grief from doctors for our degree in Google. But the reality is that we don't want to be this way. We have to be this way because we don't have anyone else helping us. We don't have anyone else doing that research for us. So I think, patients are dealing with an uphill battle sometimes. And then on top of that, you have the annoyance from physicians that we're out there trying to figure out what's going on with us. So it's sort of like you just can't win. You're either not
It reminds me
people's minds or you're doing too much.
It reminds me of in Jen Bria's TED Talk, in particular, just a line that has always stuck with me is when she says, we became our own doctors and scientists because we had to. Because I think we can all, so many of us can relate to that, whether it's, I know you said you hadn't considered ME/CFS before it was suggested to you, but Scott, you and I both were saying, we had figured out what was wrong with us long before we had the official diagnosis. And even my mom, she works in palliative care, so her background is not in anything like this, but she's the one reading the medical journals, trying to keep up to date on the latest research because that's what we have to do. And I think the way she just summed that up for me is, I think, really true to all of our experiences.
So in terms of if you could go back to when you first got sick, what would you say to yourself? What would you tell yourself in terms of what's coming and how to navigate that? What advice would you give to a younger you?
I think for me, the first thing was that when I initially got sick, the thing I struggled with most was the uncertainty. No one could give me a clear answer of if I was going to get better, what I could expect. And I think having that kind of expectation early on would have been helpful, because I think for me, a lot of people with other chronic illnesses especially talk about the grieving process they go through when they're diagnosed. But for me, for the first couple of years, I couldn't really grieve because I didn't know what I was losing. And so I spent the first couple of years half expecting to one day wake up and be fine again. And so I think the first thing I would tell myself is honestly that this is not going away, and that the earlier you can adjust how you live, the better you'll be able to live, really. So I think that's the first thing. But then the counterpart to that is I'm pretty proud of the life that I've been able to put together since getting sick. I didn't know if I was going to be able to continue on in school. I didn't know what the future was going to hold. So I think telling myself that it wasn't going to go away, but also I think if I had known in various points that, I'd come to a place where I was okay, I think that would have been important to hear early on too.
What about you, Scott?
I would say, Scott, you're going to encounter the same healthcare system, but it's going to seem like an entirely different healthcare system in the way that you're treated. So prepare yourself for being disbelieved, for being ignored, for not having any research funding for this disease, like zero, and to prepare to have to do a lot of the research on your own, and to connect with folks in the community on your own, because the medical system isn't designed or prepared for this illness.
Yeah, definitely. I think for me, and I've given this a lot of thought because I journal, and I often think, what would I do differently, or what have I done well this year? What's coming? How can I prepare? And I think one of the things for me that was the most tragic, and the thing that I struggled with the most and still struggle with, is a loss of identity. I would have told you before I got sick that I had come to a place where I really liked myself. And I don't say that in a boastful way, but I had worked really hard to get to a place where I was comfortable in my own skin. I liked who I was making a difference in the world. I was contributing. I was a person that people trusted and came to solve problems, put out fires. I was a great friend. I was a lot of fun, laughed a lot. And I'm just not that same person anymore. And it's been really tough to figure out how to be 10% of who I used to be, 20% on a good day. And I don't know that, I never read anything really about that initially. Nobody really said to me that would be something I would struggle with. So I very much felt alone in that struggle, because nobody really had talked about it. I hadn't, even all my research and my reading, I hadn't really come across a whole lot. I've seen a few things since then. But for me to have to completely alter how I interact with the world, and for me to have to lose friends and opportunities because I can't be that same person that I was, that's been a big challenge for me. And I think it's still something that I grieve and accept, and grieve and accept. And whoever thinks that this pattern of grieving is linear is wrong. It's a constant, ever-changing, bouncing around sort of process that we go forward and go back with. So I think that for me, I would probably talk to myself more about the grief aspect and the identity and what that means, and figuring out who I really am, not this image I've crafted in my head of who I must be, because that's not me anymore. So
I guess I had the advantage of being diagnosed with HIV in 1998. So I had to go through that identity re-examination, reconstitution back then. So yeah, I guess I already had that experience by the time ME came around, although it was still a big adjustment going from, elite age group triathlete, one of, top 1% fittest people in Canada, to now probably in the bottom 1% in terms of ability.
yeah, I mean, I was totally in that top 1% too. Definitely not, but I was definitely an active person. So it's hard. I used to take my kids out hiking on weekends and do outings with my neighbors, and just so many wonderful memories that I have of being able to do those things. And they're just really hard right now. So in terms of acceptance, where do you guys think you are in terms of that process? Have you made peace with some of it and still working on some of it? Maybe Ali, I'll ask you first.
Can I add one more comment to what we were saying before too?
Yeah.
One thing I've been thinking about, just like in terms of the process of coming to terms with a different identity, is the particular way that shapes you if you're a young person when you get sick. Because I got sick at 17 and I didn't really know who I was in the world at that stage. And it's an interesting thing to kind of try to parse out, because I know I've changed a lot in, the 5.5 years since I got sick, but trying to figure out, what of that is me growing up, and what of that has been shaped by being sick. And so it's really interesting to kind of to see for me how those things are kind of inseparable. Like they're so intertwined, my experience of growing up and my experience of getting sick, that it's hard to it's hard to tease one out from the other. And I've been thinking about that a lot recently, because in a lot of ways, I kind of relate to what you were saying, in that I think of myself in a lot of ways as the person that I was before I got sick. And when I think about the significant ways I've changed, it's interesting for me to kind of try to work out what of that is normal and healthy growth and what of that is change as a result of illness.
Well, and I think that's right on topic in terms of acceptance. So you're still trying to figure that out. And in some ways, you know, I've looked at younger patients and I've almost sometimes been envious, because, you know, I almost look at you and think you get the benefit of figuring it out while having ME. So maybe that's a benefit. I don't know.
I think there's advantages and there's disadvantages. There's in that way, yeah, you know, when you're young, you're still in the process of figuring out who you are and carving out your niche in the world. And so, you know, those things are happening at the same time. On the other hand, you know, I've never really experienced life in the world when I'm not sick now. Like the most recent time I was healthy was grade 11. And so I haven't experienced a lot of like adult life without ME kind of like hanging over me. And so I think in some ways it's a benefit, and in some ways I feel like I've also missed out on a lot because of it in that way.
That's understandable. I plan on doing a future podcast episode on exactly this topic, the differences between the different ages of when people find out that they have a chronic illness and how they cope, and what those challenges and perspectives are and how different they can be. So
that's really interesting, because I think the experiences can be very different. There's not a lot of young people with ME that I've run into, and I think in some ways, obviously all our experiences are so similar, but in some ways, I think our experiences of being young and kind of in this stage of life sometimes feel very far removed from like the dominant narrative of the ME patient and the things that come up, you know, on online support groups and things like that. And so it's an interesting discrepancy there.
Well, when I first went to our clinic here locally, I remember saying to my care coordinator on one of my first appointments with them, when she asked how things were going, and I said, you know, they're going well. You know, I like it here, and it's really nice to be validated and accepted here, and I feel safe here. I said, can I just mention one thing though? I sort of feel like I'm the only person who's under the age of 70. And it makes me kind of alone. And so I was sitting in workshops, and everybody was, you know, of the age of senior citizen, and, you know, and I was walking in and I looked so healthy compared to them, and I was so young compared to them. And I would get comments even from some of them saying, why are you here? You're too young to be here. And I remember just the first few months of being in clinic, just being like, God, do I even fit here? And then thankfully, thanks to my care coordinator, they moved me into a group of people closer to my age. And that has made a vast difference to my experience at the clinic, and being able to connect with other people, you know, who sort of have the same issues, same challenges on any given day, I think makes a big difference to not feeling so alone. What about you, Scott?
Definitely.
Where are you at, do you think, in your process of acceptance?
I think it's an ongoing process. I still have moments where I grieve the loss of not being able to do something, usually physical, like just being able to shovel the sidewalk. That would be awesome, you know, just to be able to do that. Not to mention, you know, the whole triathlon lifestyle. But part of me also finds that the loss, the grieving, the coping is also a motivator to do the advocacy work to make change. So it's sort of like the trauma I experienced in the medical system with this illness. Anger is a natural response to trauma, one of the natural responses to trauma. So I use that anger as a motivator towards advocacy. Gives me that energy in that direction.
What about you, Allie, in terms of your experience? Do you, because I know you do some advocacy work, are you fueled as well by sort of your grieving process and where you are in it, do you think?
I think for me, more than anything, the motivator is to change things for the people who come after me. That's like, I do some general disability advocacy stuff at my law school. I did that in my undergrad, and recently I've tried to get more involved in specific ME advocacy. And I think, yeah, for me the biggest driver is trying to establish the systems, the support that would have helped me, and leave that behind for the people who come after.
Am I hearing that you've given up hope that you're ever going to get better?
I don't think so. That's not really where I direct my advocacy, I guess. Is that for me, it's more, my focus is more on kind of making things livable and okay within the constraints of being ill and within the constraints of being disabled, whatever that looks like for people. Obviously, I still do hope that a cure is going to come along. And I think, seeing the recent research is really promising. But I think for me, I don't feel like I can exert influence over that sphere as well as I can in kind of the communities that I'm in, just trying to set up systems. Because also the reality is, if we find a cure for ME, that's awesome, and our lives will be changed, but there will be still communities of people who are disadvantaged by the same system. And so stuff that I'm trying to work on at my law school and things like that, is setting up kind of student support communities and advocacy venues collectively, so that if ME gets cured, I won't be sick anymore. And for my life, that will be incredible, but there will still be people who are experiencing the same things that I experience. And so trying to kind of set up a framework of change and of support and of advocacy there is still really important to me.
I love that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we're all taking sort of a different take on it. But one of the things I love about the ME community is the sense of sort of teamwork in terms of how we approach it. So we know we have limited energy. So, you take this part, I'll take this part, you'll take this part. And it's heartwarming to kind of see that in action when it works. And I don't know what the other communities are like in terms of, I'll learn through this podcast, I guess, how other people are doing advocacy and what's working. And maybe we can pick up a couple of really great tips from their communities. But I think the ME community is really unique in that way, in that we're very mindful of how much energy we have and where we're going to put it. And I know for me, I'm probably a little bit like you, Ali, in terms of systems change. That's probably where I'd like to see having the most impact. But I don't know, the question was interesting. Have you lost hope? I haven't lost hope, but sometimes I wonder if hope is holding me back a little bit, because I am grieving. And so is it an unrealistic expectation that the cure is going to come in my lifetime? And then I rationalize that, I guess, we know that there's a genetic component potentially to this condition, and that could mean my children could end up with this condition. So that fuels me back up into staying focused and continuing to fight. But there are moments where I wonder, am I holding out for something that won't come? And will I be more hurt when it doesn't? Should I just accept now that it won't?
I think for me also, in my experience, especially early on, of kind of not knowing if I was going to get better and like really kind of living, not necessarily day to day, but as if things would get better, I think I realized also that just for my own capacity to live my life, at least for now, I need to set things up with the assumption that I'll be sick for the rest of my life, because I think we've all gone through the process of getting your hopes up and then losing your hope and then going over and over and over again. And that just takes such a toll that for me, I go into any new, doctor or medication thinking like it would be great if it does help, but I can't keep staking my hope on something that doesn't come. So I don't think it's necessarily that I've lost hope that I'll get better, but I think it's that I'm consciously trying to orient my life so that it's not built on that hope. So that like, if that doesn't come, I'm still finding ways to be okay with where I am.
So it's about having realistic expectations, I think.
I think so.
Yeah.
And I think,
I think that's
sorry.
something we all struggle with in terms of what is realistic for us. But I think that we're all kind of trying to figure out that same question. So I appreciate that. Scott?
Yeah, so I think my expectations are also tempered because I've recovered twice, like completely recovered, full on triathlon training, racing. So the most recent metabolic trap theory that's gained all of the favor, that sort of fits with my experience. So for me, I can have a little bit more hope that I'll recover because I have twice before, although I was never as sick as I have been for the last 4 years. So there's still that, also that idea that, you know, am I going to be permanently at this sort of level? Am I going to get worse? You know, and how much worse can worse get? So that's frightening.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mine feels my illness, whatever it is that's happening in my body, feels very progressive. So every time I sort of get on top of it and feel really good, and my treatment plan is working, because whenever I stop taking it, I'm well aware of what a difference it was making. I am aware that no matter what I do, I seem to get a bit of a bump and then I slide back. So I would say fear and terror are a large part of my most days.
So
That's normal.
you get one step forward with treatment, but then you end up going 2 steps back.
I would say I get 2 steps forward, but 1 step back. And then a little later, 1 step back. And then I'll change my treatment, usually when I've hit my 2 steps back and I'm back to where I had started. So I'm aware of sort of these imaginary lines in my head of my baseline, where I don't want to go anywhere past, and where I'm aiming for. There's sort of 3 main lines that sort of are always in my head, and I'm always measuring against it and trying to figure out what I can get away with doing today. How much did I do yesterday? What is coming up this week? And sort of always trying to figure out where the lines are. But the same happens in terms of treatment and medication as well. It's like, you know, what's working really well to get me to my good line? Oh, I'm starting to slide back to where I didn't want to be, that line. So it's a lot of constant mathematical thinking, I think, for all of us in our heads. We're constantly measuring and trying to figure out what we can get away with and what's working and what isn't. And it's fairly exhausting in and of itself, just doing that. And I think a lot of chronic illness patients who don't have ME are struggling with some of that same math all the time. So I think we have that in common with a very large group of people. Mm-hmm. In terms of what's working, so now that we've kind of talked about some of the darker sides of the illness, in terms of what's working, you know, what works really well to help you guys navigate some of this? And what would you say is, you know, advice you might offer someone else to sort of, you know, start building the toolbox or building the circle?
The biggest thing for me that made a difference in my management of my ME was starting to use mobility aids. I think that had an extra roadblock for me because I'm young and look healthy. And so it was really hard to conceptually get my head around for a long time. But when I bit the bullet and started using my wheelchair, that was the only time really in my course of illness that I noticed a significant change. Because I suddenly didn't have to walk to get from point A to point B. And I didn't have to only go somewhere, you know, if it was going to be a short distance, or if I knew there was somewhere I could sit, or, you know, going to school, I no longer had to calculate, like include the walk to and from class in my, you know, mental calculations of how much I could do. So for me, that extended what I could do in the day by a significant amount and really reduced kind of the big crashes that I would get. So I think a lot of people are really hesitant because I think in a lot of ways people can perceive using a wheelchair as a negative. But for me, it was such a positive thing that, yeah, for me, it was like really the one kind of thing that changed a lot for me in my course of getting sick. And obviously I'm not suggesting that's right for everyone. But I think I think learning to be okay with like what tools you need to make your life easier, or even little things like having a shower stool where, you know, I walk into a mobility aid store and they're like, oh, are you shopping for your grandmother? And I'm like, actually, no, this stool is for me. And just like learning to be okay with that. I think, again, there's like an extra hard barrier in there when you're like 20 and trying to figure all of this out. But I think learning to be okay with needing tools and aids and things like that was really key for me in my management of my illness.
I think you're very, I really admire you, Allie, because that's major. I think most patients are struggling with whether to, you know, go that route or not. And I mean, when I was at my sickest and I wasn't going anywhere or doing anything because I couldn't, I remember thinking, if this is where I have to end up, is using a wheelchair. And I could just envision sort of everybody who knew me just being like, what are you doing?
Mm-hmm.
Like, you're not that sick, because they just don't understand, right? There's not enough awareness and knowledge. And so, yeah, I really admire you. I think you're incredibly brave to do what you need to do for you to be healthy and to be at your finest, despite all the nonsense and noise that goes on in the world about these
Yeah, I mean, I think so much of it is like learning to kind of overcome our own internalized ableism, right? And what we've learned. Like, I think before I started using my wheelchair, I just assumed that if people used wheelchairs, they physically couldn't walk. And I think that assumption is still so prevalent. But then, you know, the longer I've used mine and met other people who use wheelchairs and things like that, more or less, most people can to some degree. And we have these things that are tools to allow us to live life more easily and better. And it's not shameful to rely on them. It's not anything negative about you. It's not an indication that you're not trying as hard as you could have. It's just, on the flip side, kind of, it's a recognition that you're taking the steps that you need to be taking to live your life the way that's manageable. And yeah, I definitely see a lot of people kind of resistant and hesitant to using mobility aids. And I really understand that, because I was for a long time, but I can categorically say that it's improved my quality of life. And even if I have to deal with, you know, people, especially at first, being very confused about where my wheelchair suddenly came from, and my friends getting weird messages from people I went to high school with asking about why I'm in a wheelchair, or people in my classes asking me if I was in a car accident or things like that. It's worth putting up with all the bullshit, because it's meant, even, I think for me, the biggest thing I thought at first was, I was like, I can go for walks for fun now. And yeah, just, I don't know, that really changed a lot. So
That's amazing. I saw somebody early on. I was thinking about getting a parking pass when I was at my sickest, and I was pretty much bedridden and, you know, had to go to doctor's appointments and that kind of thing. And I thought about getting a parking pass, and thinking was, it'll be a temporary aid. And then I was coming out of the grocery store one day, and there was a young woman getting out of her vehicle, and somebody was screaming at her that she was parking in one of the parking spaces that are for individuals with disabilities. And they were yelling at her that she was taking a spot from somebody who really needed it. And I had to check my own bias, because I instantly was like, oh, that's not very nice of her. And then I thought, I'm just going to stand here just for a second, not in a creepy way, and just listen in and see. And she started to cry, and she was trying to explain. And so I ended up going over and kind of giving her a hand explaining. And the gentleman, you know, I think felt pretty embarrassed afterwards, but it scared me so much that it pushed me back off of thinking, I don't think I'm strong enough to do this. I don't think I'm strong enough to deal with everything I'm already dealing with, and then dealing with society as well. And so it's much easier to be an ally to someone in those circumstances than it is to actually be the person who has to face that every day on your own. So, you know, as I said, I admire your strength and your ability to do the right thing for yourself, because I'm certainly not probably there yet. I've got a little further, I think, a little bit more work to do. Scott, what about you?
People are judgy, and I was one of those people. So before I got sick with ME, I would ride my bike to and fro work. But I live in Toronto, and so 3 months out of the year, I couldn't really ride my bike. I'd have to take the public transit. And I would be so judgy of the people. So there's one particular stop where I would get off to get off the subway to come up to the street level, and it was about 3 stories up. And so the vast majority of people took the escalator, and I would sort of look down on those people because they were so lazy. The people who were taking the stairs, I didn't judge them so much, but I took all of the stairs 2 at a time. And those people that took the elevator, wow, you know, they didn't look sick. How lazy are they? But now that I'm one of the people who takes the elevator, I look around at the other people waiting for the elevator, and the ones who aren't obviously disabled, I wonder how many of you also have ME.
Yeah, I think that that's a good point. It's really changed our perspective probably of looking at the world in a slightly different way. I don't know that I was ever terribly judgmental in terms of that. But the parking thing, when I was a new mom and there's parking spaces for moms, it used to drive me crazy that people would park there and there'd be no baby. And I'd be like, hello, where's your baby? There'd be no baby. And of course I wouldn't say it. I'd say it in my head because I'm far too non-confrontational for such things. And so it just naturally translated that when I saw that, I thought, oh, wow, I'd have to go through that every day and have people judging me. And taking the elevator is hard enough because you take the elevator sometimes and the people who breeze past you to take the stairs, you know, with their uber enthusiasm for the stairs are kind of looking their noses down at you. And I'm like, oh, what I wouldn't do to take the stairs right now with you. So I think there's just so much of this illness that we have to deal with our doctors. And then there's so much of it that's just internal in our own minds, our own interaction with society. And I just wish more people had prepared me for that aspect because I so struggle with that still, I think. Scott, what else has helped in terms of, you know, in terms of how life is going for you? What is it that you're doing that's helping you to live life to the fullest given this condition?
I think like the vast majority of people with ME, and like Ali was speaking to as well, it's about, for me, keeping my health as good as possible. It's about keeping my energy exertion within my boundaries, within my energy envelope. So that means not walking more than 15 minutes in a row, slowly on flat ground, no more than 2 flights of stairs in a row without resting, no shoveling or using my arms for anything really. So yeah, just keeping my energy to a minimum, because if I go over that energy envelope, then I'm really useless for a few days. So it's just not worth it.
And Ali, do you find you have to pace as well, especially as a student?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think I've been doing this long enough now that to some extent it's second nature. But yeah, I have to pretty carefully build my schedule. And I know for me that my limit is I can only do 3 hours at a time and then I have to rest. And that is a hard and fast rule. And so it's, again, yeah, I'm pretty good at just kind of knowing that at this stage, and even just like knowing when my body is telling me to rest, even if I couldn't verbalize why. But yeah, having to listen to that, I think kind of what Scott was saying, I think over the past couple of years, I've gotten to a place where I don't have those crashes as much because I'm better at knowing where my limits are and respecting them. But it's definitely hard as a student. I'm part-time in law school, which is like not really a combination that often works well together, because law school is go, go, go. And it's really hard being a part-time law student, and having to figure out how to pace. It involves a lot of self-advocacy, because I think a lot of the time people assume that if you're part-time, you know, you could take a week off and be full-time for a week and that's okay. And I've had to go to meetings with the administration and explain that, you know, unlike people who might be part-time for work reasons or family obligations, I can't take a week off of being sick, and that my limits can't change for a week. So I think, yeah, pacing and being careful to not overdo it comes naturally after a while, but it's definitely a difficult thing to choose to do, but it improves kind of the quality of the rest of your time because I don't then get into those huge swing crash cycles quite as frequently. So
that's really hard to learn because our society really teaches us, well, when the going gets tough, you just try harder.
yeah.
But our bodies, when the going gets tough, the exact last thing we should do is try harder. It's really hard to learn to rest.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've all kind of internalized that capitalist narrative, right? That like we're defined by our productivity and that we have to keep pushing through. And it's very like countercultural to say no and to set these limits and respect them. And it can definitely seem weird to people who don't know you as well. And to keep people who are kind of adjusting to the way of life. Like I think for me, it's always interesting making friends after I've gotten sick and kind of having to explain just the way things work. But yeah, because it's very much not how we're programmed as a society to function.
No, I think it's hard too when you're a parent, and especially when you're a mom. I think there's a lot of pressures and a lot of ideals that you want for yourself as to how you're going to parent, and then there's all this pressure as the female in the family to sort of do all the cooking, all the cleaning, and you know, in our family, thankfully, I'm with a man who doesn't have those sort of traditional views. He's very much a feminist and very open to sort of sharing things equally. But you know, we've gotten to a point now where we're not sharing things equally. He's doing much more than I am in terms of household things. And I have to sort of make my peace in some ways with that. And I'm a very independent person who sort of only ever counted on herself. And so to have to count on somebody else, that's a huge adjustment. And then, you know, when my kid wants to do something, to have to look in his beautiful face and say, you know, Mommy can't do that today because remember yesterday when we had all that fun? That was the fun that I could have this weekend. Today's a rest day. And, you know, I got great kids and a great husband. I've got some really good friends who are very understanding, or they try to be at least. I mean, it's hard, I think, if you've never been chronically ill. But there's still so much pressure that I put on myself, as I'm sure you guys do, to try and be something to someone or to everyone that we just can't be. And so pacing, I find incredibly difficult. I'm working on it still. I wouldn't say it's second nature for me. I would say that I'm really good at remembering I'm supposed to do it. I'm not always so great at actually doing it, especially if I can help someone with something. I feel like, oh, well, I can help. Like that makes me feel good. And that's something that's worth doing. So, you know, it's a work in progress, I think. In terms of what has you feeling hopeful, we've talked a little bit about the fact that there's not a lot of research funding happening in Canada right now, which was mentioned earlier. There's some research happening in other parts of the world. And I know that Canada, I think, you know, we can safely say is moving in the right direction. But, you know, what has you feeling hopeful just in terms of this illness?
Well, for me, on a personal level, what's making me feel hopeful immediately is at the end of February, I go for an MRI to see if I've got that cranial cervical instability, to see if there's a problem in my neck which is causing my ME symptoms. So right now, that's giving me hope because just this morning, I twisted my body in a way that I could feel the pain in my neck and just the whole nausea and everything. So I had to spend 30 minutes being horizontal and recovering from that. So yeah, that's my hope for me personally. And then on a advocacy level, I think hopefully the new research network that Canada is going to start is just the foundation for many good things to come in a very quick time.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think we're all really hopeful about what potentially is going to happen there. You know, our fingers are crossed. I think we'll know more in a few months in terms of whether that's going to happen or not. And if it's not, you know, my hope is that everyone will keep fighting because this could be a very big blow to everybody. Morale, I think, if we don't move forward this year with some research funding. So I'm really hopeful that this is going to happen. And if it doesn't, I'm really hopeful that we can kind of maintain and sustain some fight and some heat where we need to, so that we can make that happen, because that's crucial. Allie?
Similar to Scott, like I think there's different things on a personal and like on a broader level. I think personally, I've recently just like tried some meds that I think have made a little bit of a difference in my energy and my capacity, and any little bit I think is significant. And I think I've not had very good luck with various medications. Like I haven't really found much that's helped over the past 5 years. And so to kind of have something that feels like it's doing something is encouraging and rare. And yeah, and I also, like you were talking about going to the States to see people, that's happening for me in February as well. And so just the prospect of talking about different potential medication options.
Where are you going?
Encouraging. To the clinic at Stanford.
Awesome.
Mm-hmm. And then I think on a broader level, I think, well, where the three of us met actually was at the conference in Montreal last May. And I think just having all those researchers around and like hearing about what's actually going on was encouraging, because, you know, we only see studies when they come out and are finished. And so I think just knowing what's happening and that there are people who are working on this and who have all these various different ideas. I think it was last year maybe that there was talk of potential like movement with like figuring out different subtypes and things like that. And so just even hearing stuff like that for me has been encouraging that we're moving in the right direction. And yeah.
I think I'm probably not feeling as upbeat as I normally would like to be. I'm going through a bit of a period, I think, right now where I'm struggling a little bit with my enthusiasm and my hopefulness, as Scott knows, because we had to have a little chat yesterday. I needed a little boost of enthusiasm from him, so I borrowed a little. But I think, I think that's part of the process, is sort of the ups and downs of this illness. And, there are good days, there are bad days, and then there are all the days in between. I will say that I'm really thankful. I don't know if I'm as hopeful as I need to be, but I'm definitely thankful. Having seen the researchers at the CFS conference in May, I'm with you, Allie, having seen all of them talking together, seeing their enthusiasm and their excitement, their intellectual curiosity being focused on this illness was really something amazing to come home with. And then being able to continue those relationships with some of them and see them continue to push forward and continue to be excited about what's possible. And again, that intellectual curiosity being directed at this illness has made me feel like we're in good hands and we don't have to shoulder the entire burden ourselves. And so that, I guess, for me is where, the big picture thankfulness is. And then on a personal level, I think I'm just really thankful for my family sticking with me. I know how many people don't have that benefit. And, I have a really good partner and a really great couple of kids, and some wonderful neighbors who help me out with all kinds of small things that they probably don't even realize is helpful. And some friends who, check in on me and visit me and bring me food, and just little things that they don't even realize probably make all the difference in the day. So I think that, if we could leave any message with folks who are listening, who are maybe the healthy ones with friends who are chronically ill, I think I would, encourage them to talk to the person, their friend or their family member who's chronically ill, and ask them, what could I be doing to lessen the load a little? What could I be doing in terms of, making your day a little brighter? Because I think we all kind of know what we'd like. And so I think it's just encouraging that conversation, making it okay so that we can have that dialogue. And it doesn't always have to be big stuff.
Absolutely.
For me,
Just to add on to that, I would concur with that, to be able to listen to what the ill person is saying and actually hear it, and not feel that the healthy person needs to suggest treatments or supplements, or, because we've done the research, we know all about that. So that's not helpful, but listening and asking, what can I do to support you? That's helpful. Sorry, Allie.
I was just going to say, kind of on a different note, for me, one of the other things that's made me not necessarily hopeful or thankful, and I don't really know what the right word is, but that's made me kind of feel more at peace, I guess, with where I'm at in terms of being sick, is that I think over the past year, especially, I've been connected with kind of a growing number of younger people who've recently got sick and have been able to kind of like help people, guide people, answer questions about the early stages of being sick. And I feel like it seems kind of like weird for me to say that like that's making me like hopeful or whatever about being sick, because I'm obviously not happy that there's other people who are sick. But I think I know for me that early on, knowing someone who was a little older, who had been sick for a bit longer, and having her be able to kind of guide me through the initial stages was really crucial. And so to kind of feel that I'm now at a place in my life and like with ME that I can be that for other people, that gives me a lot of hope, I think, just in the sense that I think there's so much value in community and communal support, and knowing that I have the capacity to make other people's experiences with ME a little easier. I don't know if hopeful is the right word, but it kind of does make me a bit hopeful, or brings me some peace, just knowing that our shitty experiences can be used for good and to make other people's experiences just a little bit less shitty. So for me, yeah, I think that's kind of bringing me hope going into 2019 as well.
Yeah, I would characterize you as an expert patient now. that your lived experience, which makes you an expert patient, has a lot of value, which our healthcare system really needs to value. Sabrina, there was something you said earlier that reminded me of an insight I had when I had a number of bad years with HIV before I started on medication, and the early medications I was on were really hard on my body. And I used to say, well, you have to have good and bad days, because if you didn't have bad days, how would you know what the good days were? And that helped me get through that period of time.
Yeah, I get that. I get all those really positive messages that I should be thinking about, but I think when you're in
they don't resonate with me sometimes. I'm just like, all right, I would know if I was fine. I don't need to feel shit.
Yeah, I think I'm definitely usually an optimistic, happy-go-lucky kind of person, but man, does this illness really test that in a way that I haven't had that tested before. And so I think for me, part of doing the podcast is really, that I want to take something negative, something that I don't feel I have enough control over, and I want to do something with it that makes me feel like it wasn't all for nothing, and that maybe I can turn it around. Maybe I can offer it to someone. Maybe I can help someone not feel so alone. And maybe I'm going to fail at this miserably, because, it's a real possibility, but I'd rather try while I'm healthy enough to try than to get so sick in the future that I'll be laying in my bed wishing I had done this. So I kind of made my peace with this, because this is an idea that I had been sort of rolling around for about a year and was too scared, was absolutely crippled with fear at the thought of actually trying to not only put myself out there, but attempting to sort of do all this when I'm not feeling my finest. And that's kind of scary, and it could be super embarrassing to do that and then ask my really good friends to join me in that. But then the thing that keeps coming back to me is remembering what it was like to just be stuck in bed when I couldn't do anything, and all the thoughts I had, because I wasn't one of the people, we have so many people who are bedbound, and so many of them are really struggling to be able to even think, because their minds are, so taken up with this illness. I was one of the people who my body didn't work, but my mind kept going. So I had 100 ideas a minute and couldn't execute on any of them at that time because I was so sick. So now that I'm in treatment and the medications are working and I'm able to work some and I'm able to function as a parent and as a member of society again, everything else just seems really clear. It seems very black and white to me now. It seems very simple. It's better to try and fail than to not try at all, because I don't want to be laying in that bed again in a year or two and thinking, why didn't I do that when I had the chance? So that's kind of made this really simple for me. And And the name is a little ironic, obviously, Sicksplaining. It kind of goes to what Scott was saying earlier, where everybody's always telling us to, you know, drink lemon juice, eat avocados, try yoga,
Do
breathe.
yoga.
Yeah, breathe more, mindfulness, you know, all those things are wonderful. All of those things are great. And I do all of those things, but I've yet to see a cure come from an avocado. So I think it's about, you know, helping the healthy people amongst us and in our circles understand that those suggestions sometimes make us feel like you think we haven't thought of them ourselves. So instead have the, you know, have the discussion, ask the questions, you know, what could I be doing that would be helpful? And maybe ask, you know, give me 3 or 4 things I could do that could be helpful, because maybe I can't do all of them. Maybe I could do one. Maybe I could do one every couple weeks and try to brighten your day a little. And I got to tell you, for me, it'd be as simple as receiving a text. On a bad day, when I receive a text or a message from somebody, sometimes it's enough to perk me back up and lift my spirits. So I think we'll end there. Any final words from you guys in terms of what you'd like folks listening, either those who are chronically ill or those who are the people who love them?
Yeah, if you feel that you have a physical illness and the medical system is telling you it's all in your head, don't believe them. Listen to your sick gut.
And you're in good company if they do tell you that.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
we've all been told that.
Yeah.
Ali?
I think for me, just it's hard to learn to live in a new way, but trying to live the way that you did before isn't going to work. And the sooner you can kind of try to figure out how to reorient your life, the sooner you're going to be able to kind of craft a life that you're okay with within your new limitations. And that it's important to kind of do that internal work of learning to be okay asking for help, and to learn to be okay not being as independent as you were, but that we all have to go through that process, but yeah, like you were saying, it's important to try.
Well, thank you both so much for being willing to share your stories and some of the lessons that you've learned along the way and some of the challenges that you've faced. I hope that we'll have some listeners who will take some good away from this. And for those who are listening, if they have ideas for future podcast episodes, future guest ideas, please feel free to send them along. I'll make sure to put the links at the bottom of this video, and we'd love to hear from you. And thank you both so much, and I'm sure we'll be talking again soon.
Great.
Hey everyone, hope you enjoyed the very first episode of Sicksplaining. Please feel free to follow us on social media and share the love and share the episode. We'll see you soon.